Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the UX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. I'm not quite as loud as I usually am. My baby's asleep right downstairs, so I'm trying to keep my voice down a little bit. But this podcast is brought to you by the Conversational Academy, the one-stop shop for your conversational designing needs. As we go through the next few months and years, the need for conversational designers is only going to increase, and the Conversational Academy have put together the best online course for conversational design training. It will take you through from beginning to end, from discovery to design to prototyping to testing. It'll teach you everything you need to know to be a world-leading conversational designer. Check it out. The link's in the show notes and also on the webpage if you're listening to this online. Today's guest is Ha-Hoa Hamano, and she is the Senior Product Manager at NPR. For those that don't know, NPR is certainly in the top skills in America. It's kind of the equivalent of the BBC in America, but not exactly the same because it's not quite government funded. But the skill is, it will be one of the most used. On the Dashbot Competitive Analysis reports, it is the second rated skill in the USA. They've got games there as well. They've got a flash briefing. They're working closely with Amazon on a few things which we talk about, but the main topic of discussion really is how NPR approach user research and listener participation in their design process. We talk about how they recruit users, we talk about the kind of testing they do. There's some really, really good nuggets and gems in here. We also talk about the relationship that they have with Amazon and a whole host more. It's a really, really interesting discussion. You're going to absolutely love it. This is Ha-Hoa Hamano of NPR on the UX World.
The UX World. The UX World. The UX World. The UX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado, welcome to the show.
Well, so we have a great guest today. It's Ha-Hoa Hamano from NPR. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so you work at NPR and you work on voice heavily, and you've given a lot of talks at conferences, but people might not know who you are yet. So do you mind introducing yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Ha-Hoa Hamano. I'm a senior product manager on emerging platforms at NPR. And so that includes connected cars, connected TVs, and voice platforms are a part of my portfolio. And I occasionally get to work on the a smart fridge or two. And so anything that's beyond some of our core apps and experiences fall into my purview.
And NPR, National Public Radio, I'm always actually really surprised when I speak with people who don't know what NPR is. But for those who don't, what is NPR?
Sure. We are a national nonprofit membership organization and multimedia organization. And so we have member stations across the U.S. who participate and pay for our programming, as well as some of the digital offerings that we have. Again, the website, mobile, and then we produce a couple of flagship shows, namely Morning Edition and All Things Considered. And so that's where our audience lies, mostly in our broadcast, our radio audience, and about 97% of the U.S. population is within broadcast range of an NPR station.
So is it kind of, would I be correct in describing NPR for the non-US listeners as I'm sure most people have heard of it and know obviously the brand, but it's similar to BBC. Would I be right in saying that?
We love the BBC and their model. Most folks think of us as kind of similar to like the BBC or the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation or like the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. We collaborate with them a lot in terms of like their unique challenges. What's unique about NPR is that we're a membership organization and we're not. It's not government funded, and so the stations pay into NPR for our programming and support services. And some of those stations get government funding, but NPR on its whole does not get government funding the way the BBC and some of our good friends at CBC and ABC do.
And you're not just radio, right? You have quite a number of digital properties, voice and otherwise.
That's right. I mean, a lot of our programming is audio first. We also have a very strong web presence. We're, a very highly trafficked media website as well, and so a lot of our text-based content is there. We have some of our properties are text first, and so that's an exciting place for some of our global health content. And then we do have, our apps, our skills, our actions. We have Tiny Desk, which is another popular thing here stateside, where we have upcoming artists and, known artists come and play behind literally an office desk at our office that I've been privileged to see and attend. Lizzo is one of our most popular ones to date, and that was really cool. And so that's distributed via YouTube and our website. And there's also an audio form of that as well. And so, and all of those properties, both, Tiny Desk, some of our podcasts do live events as well. And so those come out as audio and video and obviously in-person events too. And so we try and really be engaged with the public, with all of our content.
What are some of the things you've been doing in voice specifically right now?
Yeah, what we were there at launch with, Alexa in the U.S., and that's given us kind of a great foothold and with our flash briefing. And so there are a lot of folks that know of NPR via that initial flash briefing, which we appreciate and love that it was such a great fit for us. Again, sometimes we talk about it in the building as like, that the Alexas and the Google Assistants are like this kind of spiritual predecessor or successor to radio, and that's exciting. And so we try and get a lot of our current offerings available easily via Alexa and Google Assistant. I think what's really exciting now, and which is what I go on the road and I'm super excited to talk about, is kind of the second phase of that, where we're really using the unique features of those platforms. And as things are innovating and moving so fast on all of these platforms, that we're there to kind of see where our content fits and how we can meet them where they are. Obviously, multimodal is exciting for a lot of folks, where now they can be like, oh, great, a screen. Now I can use this platform. For us, it's a little bit of a challenge, but we are seeing that that's helpful, certainly with our weight quiz and some of our other visual first properties that we can also innovate when there's a visual in the screen, as well as our kind of groundbreaking audio content as well. And so that's the second one, and our second phase, and what we're currently doing. I think our third phase is just to really lead the market on some of the experiences where we do have a really loyal and strong audience there, and they give us feedback. We have tons of ideas in our building, and so how do we kind of go out and lead as well in the space, so that we can drive the features ourselves? Maybe even something to think about something in a way that the platforms hadn't thought about before, because we're so deeply invested in this.
What are some of the examples of those? So the first phase was the flash brief. Is that what you started with? You initially started with the flash briefing.
Right. We started with a flash briefing. We also have streams, which I think is something that where we talk a lot with our colleagues outside of the States on, in terms of like radio streams, frequencies, some of the really challenging things of like call and response to call letters and those kind of things. So live radio streams, it was also fit into that first bucket. And then now the one that kind of led us into the second bucket of unique features is our NPR One experience, which is a little more on demand. You can skip, you can personalize, you can take it from the mobile app to your TV, to your Alexa. And so those are some of the unique features, and that's what's powering our partnership for Alexa What's the News. And so in the US, that's us, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, and I think Bloomberg News, where there's only 5 of those partners who had this longer form flash briefing that they went out with in the spring. And so that is where we were able to take the lead there and show that, we have more than 5 minutes of audio content. Here's how you can really deepen the engagement with news.
And what are some of those? You mentioned the unique features. Are you talking multimodal and having people being able to kind of like essentially ask their radio for stuff? Is anything else in terms of the unique features that are particularly stand out from
the wait quiz is one of those where it's moving beyond the just ask the radio for a thing and play it. The wait quiz is interactive, it's open-ended, and so it's not kind of multiple choice, and so we're introducing news-making names where they're hard to pronounce, they're hard to understand, and we really wanted to bring that live show experience onto the speaker, or onto the voice platforms, and so they are open-ended questions, things that could be in the news that are new. And so we're using some of the dynamic slots functionality there. And so we really wanted to push the envelope there and say that it had to be kind of, like a quiz in time. They had to feel the urgency and they're like, oh, I know the answer. It's at the tip of my tongue. And they'll guess twice. There's a lot of stuff with opening up that mic to have open-ended questions. And folks, if you see the rating, then folks on both platforms actually really do enjoy it. And folks that have go to the show or listen to the podcast say it feels like being on the show. And that is just like that was our goal there. It was like you wanted to feel like you were on the show live and laughing along with the news. And so we produce that content every week just for the quiz. It's not like just snipped from the show. And so we changed up our process there. Folks are having fun. Our producers have fun doing that quiz, and our users are having fun taking it. And so I think that's where we saw just what it means to take advantage of the unique features available. That in early days of the games, folks did want us to say, is the answer A this or B that? We wanted to push the platform. We wanted to push the experience so that it could be fully open-ended, and that's what we see as a prime example of like staying at the bleeding edge of the technology.
What are some of the things that you're doing to handle those open-ended questions and still be able to understand the users?
Yeah, there's obvious, like we know that there are parameters and there's best practices that both platforms put out to say, monosyllabic, common words, don't make that the answer. And so prime example, during our soft launch phase, one of the answers was ant. And so it's like, and so the answer was ant, monosyllabic, one word, super common, right? Like all of the things not to do. And it was the answer. And guess what ant sounds like? End. And so we did it, and we were doing it in user testing, and we got a couple of complaints. We're like, God, the quiz just ends. Oh gosh, it's super buggy. Why is it ending? Literally, it was the word ant. They would say ant, and the quiz would end. And so we caught that, and before we went to hard launch, we no longer had that question in there. But that's learning. It's like follow Alexa's best practices, number one, and two, you're going to learn. The platform will change from underneath us, and so we just have to keep an eye on those user complaints and those user interactions. Play the game yourself. Play everyone in the game, everyone in the building. Play the game yourself, so that we catch some of those quirks before they go.
It's live. Interesting. I've had if I say to Alexa, turn it up, as in turn the volume up, she'll turn it up. But if I say to Google, turn it up, it turns it off. my up must sound like off.
Yeah.
That's actually funny, Kane, because when I try to turn off my lights with Google, 50-60% of the time it turns it on. Really? It turns them on. But what I found out, I mention this sometimes when I give talks. I was home with the flu and I was in bed and I had a terrible temperature and I just was not ready to deal with it anymore. So I said, turn off the beeping lights, and it works every single time. Every time.
Classic.
So you mentioned testing. NPR does a lot of testing for your voice applications, do you not?
Yeah, we try and do it at kind of the ideation phase. As you can imagine, how excited folks are in the building about this. There's a lot of ideas, and I appreciate all of those ideas. Sometimes the vendors come to us with those ideas. Sometimes the platforms come to us with those ideas. And I think, again, coming into this kind of second and third phase and being doing this for a while now, we've learned that we don't have to go to market right away with the idea, right? That to test the idea first. And so some of that testing takes the shape of discovery sprints. We loosely follow some of the design sprint stuff that came out of Google Ventures, and that's been helpful at times when it's a kind of a depending on the end of the spectrum, whether it's a super vague idea or a super fleshed out idea, and we need to kind of make sure that it's deliverable and feasible, we'll use different methods. And so sometimes we'll have sprints with just the editorial team if it's kind of a huge process change. But then I think what obviously for us, the most exciting part is the user validation side of it. And so we are super lucky that NPR has a lot of loyal users. We have a lot of channels where we can survey these folks and get participants. And so we'll either do it at the end, in the beginning at the ideation, after an internal ideation phase, and certainly somewhere in the middle as well. By the end, occasionally we've in the past, in our non-disciplined past, we'll try and do the validation right at the end, which is a risky thing. We try not to do that, because then you're going to go to everyone's waiting for it to launch, and if we have to go back to the drawing board, then we're we've spent wasted cycles, and so we usually try it very, very close to the beginning. And if it's, depending on the results, we'll do another point in the middle of the project as well. Like basically once we go into flows and then go into prototyping, we'll do it again with a real live prototype.
What would be an example of the kind of testing that you would do in the ideation phase with users?
Yeah, I mean, really, we try and get the device out of the mindset. And so we'll say we're doing, a concept or a voice, and we'll read it, or we'll kind of Wizard of Oz test it, where we'll read it from a queue and have people talk back to us, and we'll read back or play back some audio from our computer to show that this is the response that we're expecting, and ask them, how they think about that. One of the great examples from that I love our designers who blog about this say is they'll say, if you came home and you told your smart speaker device this, what would you expect? And so they'll tell you what they expect, right? And so the scribe is writing all of this down. And so then we say, okay, go ahead and say that. And then we'll play a audio clip from our computer, and then say, so what do you think? And then they'll say, they'll give their response to that. And while they're giving that response, the post analysis is, it was exactly what they expected, or their face was their brow was furrowed, and they totally did not like what they got back. And so those are some of the things where we try and make it really open-ended. We try and get their expectations out. We especially try and get, the commands that they are using, because that's always our golden ticket out of user testing, is words that we would never have thought of to put into our sample utterances. And so there's a lot that we unpack from, and it's usually a half an hour or 45-minute session with each person, whether it's remotely or in person, or whether they come into our offices to do that. And so we try and get probably 6 or 7 folks in to do that. And then we crunch and we analyze, and we go back to the drawing board or move forward with what we were planning to do.
And do you have you must kind of have an idea or a concept prepared, or do you have many ideas and concepts prepared? Is it a case of if you're going to bring someone down into the office, do you have like, I don't know, 6 or 7 different ideas, or do you kind of just have one idea and you try and iterate that? How does all that kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as the product manager, I'll look at the script and I'm like, but I want to ask them all these 3 things that I know is like down the pipeline. We try and focus it. We try and not to, bombard them with like the entire future roadmap for NPR and voice. And so most of the time, we are trying to just very specifically around a concept and idea. And if I can sneak my way and convince the designer to sneak in like a future question, we will. But for us, it's what we're trying to build into our process overall, that it can't just be this once a year thing where we talk to a user, that every project we need to build in the time to talk to real people and again, multiple times during the project, that it can't just be one time at the beginning and we go on a 4-month project and we never talk to a user again. And so I think that's what we've, really been trying to discipline ourselves with, is to have the lead time, to build in the time. If things are going, or if things are taking longer, that we need to build in that time to talk to users and get that touch point again.
Was this an area where you had to convince management that to push back those timelines to accommodate?
I think what was really refreshing is they appreciate hearing from users, right? Like, I think that's where the validation comes all the way around, is that this user said the same thing we said. And they're like, oh, that's great. And I think overall it's not necessarily pushback. I think it's just, expectations for timing. I think one of the things that I'm trying to really emphasize here is moving slower to move faster, in that by investing in this time early and often with direct contact with their users, that we can get to, some of the development part, the part that everybody wants, the build part, faster, and that you're not going back and you're not questioning some of these assumptions throughout, and that the developers and designers aren't having to go back and forth so often. And so I think that our management and our leadership are seeing the value of really talking to our users. I think for all of us who are super user centered, like, obvious, see it as something that's obvious, but I think our leadership understands when we go out with experiences that are consistently like 4 and 5 stars, that they understand that it is because we aren't blindly pushing things in the market, that we are testing them and validating with users early.
So you mentioned that you do that kind of upfront validation. So presumably you've gone through some kind of exercise where you have an idea for a use case. You then bring people in to do this testing. How do you do that? Do you pay people to come in? Does NPR have the kind of brand that people just really want to be involved and are happy to come and do it? Do you always do it in person? Like, how does that process happen? How do you get people and how does it all kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do value our users, and when they come to, even though they are super loyal and will come in, just to be in the building or just to talk to a designer, we do compensate. And so depending on how long it is, we'll send over gift cards, and then that's upfront. We let them know in the pre-screener that they'll be compensated for it, and it is because this is driving value for the organization. We should return that value to our super loyal listeners and users. And so it depends, depending on what we need. Again, it's not always, a 45-minute like user testing task completion type of session. Sometimes it's a little more open-ended. And so we do try and profile the folks that we're trying to get ahead of time. And so if it's a national product, obviously we're trying to go national and get folks geographically diverse, age diverse, and other demographic diversity there. And so a lot of that comes through in our pre-screener. We have a ton of channels that we tap into. We have newsletters. We have the flash briefing on, depending on like, is it a new device? Are we targeting new device owners? Are we targeting longstanding users? Depends on which experience we'll target them on. And so sometimes it's the flash briefing, sometimes it's like podcasts that happen to be playing on the devices, or just podcasts in general. And then we'll ask, do you have a device or not? What's been really effective for us is some of the multimodal ones. I think it's because the URL is like shown on the screen. Just to show you how loyal our audience is, we actually, for headless devices, folks will email our help desk and say, I heard a URL on the Alexa and I want to participate in the survey, and we'll email them back the URL. And so again, we're incredibly fortunate to have a really loyal audience that will write into our help desk, our help center, and ask for that URL to participate. And so again, and we try. And so we know that it skews super loyal and that they'll give us a ton of positive feedback. And so that's something that I think our designers know and understand too, and try and get them to, give us a little bit of criticism occasionally. And with the visual ones and with the in-person ones, you can see the cringes and like the furrowed brows and those kind of things. And so we enjoy it, even if sometimes it skews the, you're doing great, everything is great feedback.
So, correct me if I'm wrong then, but what you were getting at there is that NPR will advertise for recruiting users for user research purposes within your voice experiences?
Absolutely. I mean, right? Like we want to know that for experiences that we're testing that are similar. And so, for news experiences, we'll try a news experience. If it's wait, we advertise it on the podcast, and other places and newsletters where we can ask them for it. And so we are trying to get it to a very specific demographic, and we have those abilities to, hone in because we want to get it. And sometimes it is just a broad, like, ask everybody what they think. And we do that on the newscast occasionally, annually too, to say, in general, how is NPR doing? And those are surveys. And that's a perfectly great tool as well. And so it just depends on kind of the really honed audience and target that we're trying to get validation on. Is it a new person who does not know how to turn this on? What are we going to ask them versus like, this is an NPR listener who's listened forever, like is this satisfactory to kind of the experience that they expected? So we have quite the bag of tools to get at those questions and answers.
If you didn't have this pool of loyal fans, how do you think you'd go about recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started this, I think it was, definitely like one that always comes up is Craigslist. Nextdoor, I will say, it was another one. If you're talking like geography, that's something where if you, especially coming into the office, you're like, oh, folks in the neighborhood that live around the office. We are, again, I keep saying this, we're super lucky. We're super lucky to have tours in the building. And so we will just talk to our tour leaders and say, hey, can I come in at the end? Ask a couple folks if they want to participate. And so, some of them are local, some of them aren't. But if it's remote, then we can connect with them afterwards. And I think we certainly have some of our other folks and our other teams do the coffee shop kind of intercepts too. And so that's happens and can work too. I think one of the other ones we've seen is the co-working spaces. And so you'll get kind of a tech savvy lean there. But certainly, again, just it plays into kind of the coffee shop intercept world, and you'll just get a different bucket of folks when it's in like a WeWork type of place.
Sounds as though you've got a real user research culture. Doesn't sound as though, because I mean, from the user testing and user research that kind of I've done plenty of in the past, it's like, yes, it's part of the project. Yes, there's a point in time when you need to do it. But there'll be, for example, if you're building a website or whatever, or a new kind of online service, you'll have like checkpoints. It's like, right, we'll do some testing there. We'll have a week to iterate, and we'll do some testing down there. And it's kind of like, it always feels as though like, although actually now and more recently, you're starting to see people who have like an email list of people who have expressed an interest in somewhere. but it always seems sometimes as though that if you're starting from cold, it's very difficult to kind of get enough people to come in on the same day to kind of do the testing. But it seems as though, is this something you do on a project by project basis, as in like, you know that there's checkpoints where you need to have certain people by, so then you'll do that kind of like all of this stuff you've just described in time for that? Or is this just like an ongoing thing that you have as part of the culture of the team? Is that it's just a constant recruitment, constant testing, constantly?
Yeah, I think we would love for it to be constant. I think it's a resource challenge for us to just maintain an open, keep a survey open and cull it and make sure that folks aren't like just not being responded to. It's a very kind of high touch process, and we enjoy that. And I think that, again, with our loyal audience, they deserve to have, an individual person reply. And so we don't do it. It's not open-ended, but we would love for it to be, I would love to talk to users every week if I could. And so it is for us, it is part of the core principles for any project or feature or product that I'm working on. And it's, and folks that have seen me speak before, I have this little cycle of, this little graph of the cycle. And if you take shortcuts in the build process, right? Like we don't want to, everyone wants to over optimize for the build process and give the devs as much time as they can. But I think even the developers on my team know that it's so important that initial understanding and shared understanding is really important, and that users are validating it. And users could be our station colleagues, it could be internal folks, right? Like, and users aren't always external, but that once you take that shortcut, that, understand that at the end, at launch, when you go to market, everyone has to look each other in the eye and say, we went to market and we took a shortcut on user validation. And so this cannot be a surprise to anybody if, that we have 1,000, now our post-launch maintenance is, actually a V1.1 or a hotfix or some kind of cycle that actually extends the build process. And so I think that's something that Dustin, I think, spoke to, is like how committed is the leadership in that. I think it's committing to the pie and knowing that any shortcuts in build means there's a shortcut, that the end process is going to have a shortcoming in some part or fashion. And so I think making that clear up front that this is standard, as folks that work in Agile, right, that this is the definition of done, that at some point, somebody in the real world outside of this building has validated that this thing doesn't suck, right? And so I think that's, at the very least, we try and do that. And then sometimes it's just like somebody not in my department has tried it out. And that's like, not ideal, but that's fine. But for us, the standard and the gold bar is somebody outside of the building has used and validated these ideas.
It sounds like what you're saying, which is really attractive, is you're going to do it now or you're going to do it later. But if you do it now, you'll save some embarrassment down the line.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly, we'll catch a bug after launch and that's fine. But I think if we did not catch a very important kind of user pain point, then that is because we took a shortcut on actually talking to a broad enough spectrum of users.
When you bring the users into the building for testing, what kind of setup do you have there?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a great blog post from my colleague Katie Briggs at NPR.design that talks through their principles for kind of setting up the room. We have a future home lab that feels like a living room that is useful for some cases. And I think some of the participatory design and kind of the idea exploration works well there. Sometimes we do need a fancier setup with a camera and some other things, and so we'll use a different room for that. But we love our future home lab. It has a rug in there, it has a little coffee table, and has devices set up. And so we try as much as we can to put them in the moment. I think one thing from Katie's talk that I love is everyone looks at the device when they're testing, right? And it's just like, that is like, right away that it's like not how people use the device. We don't look at our Alexa and talk to it. It's like behind us or wherever it is on the stand. And so that's the kind of disconnect that we're trying to break up there is, have them talking, have them sitting on a couch and having them feel as natural as they can, so they're not staring at a device while we're trying to get them to explain how they're using it. So.
And what happens further down the line then? So we've mentioned, we'll link to that, by the way, the NPR.design. We just had a quick look. It looks pretty cool. We'll put it in the show notes. What happened? So we've spoke about the culture. We've spoke about the kind of setup. We've spoke about kind of buy-in and leadership support. We've spoke about the culture and the process. And then we've spoke about the initial use case validation, sort of user research that you'll do. What then happens after that? So you've had people in, you've done that initial validation session, you've obviously got the rest of the project to go. Where else do you involve users, and how does that look?
We certainly look at the data. So the data that we come back from, listening times and users and those kind of like very standard basic metrics that we get, that tell us what's happening, not necessarily why. We'll just watch that, and that's very much like post-launch and pre and post-launch. Those are the numbers we're keeping an eye on. I think once we are able to revisit, some of the things that we didn't get to launch, but would love to add, again, with user comments, reviews, our help system, our audience relations team is fantastic. And they will certainly tell us if like 20 people wrote in and told us like this piece is missing or they're having trouble with that. And so we'll do a post-launch review there and evaluate whether it's something that's worth addressing right away. And I think what we're trying to get back to, and again, there's been a lot of great discipline in us getting into the pre-launch process. I think the post-launch process is something that we would love to get back to and really evaluate. We try and do a 60-day post-launch kind of survey, and some of our applications we're able to see and touch folks who tried it within 30 days and never came back, that tried it that didn't stay past 30 days. And we'll try and say, thanks for trying it out. What didn't you like? What were some of your pain points? And they'll write back and happily tell us what they didn't like about it. And then obviously for folks that stayed beyond the 30 days, like what thanks for trying it out. Also, what else do you think can be improved? And so we'll try and crunch those and have it inform kind of our development timelines there. But it's something, again, the discipline post-launch, we haven't quite gotten to keep that standard post-launch as we have pre-launch.
And how are you reaching them people? Is that waiting for people to come to you and then doing the survey, or are you doing like outreach to gather that?
For some of our products, you have to log in, and so we know that we can reach back out to them and just say, sorry to see you go. What was your biggest kind of pain point on why you didn't come back? Right,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Not all of them are there, and so then we mostly just get the ones that are still participating.
So you're doing ongoing research on existing stuff, mm-hmm. and also you have the process of going through when you're creating new stuff. Is there so for the existing stuff, is there like I don't know, like a roadmap and certain points in time when you're going to be releasing new kind of features that spurs this on? Like how do you go about the maintenance of something existing or the iteration of something existing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We certainly, for me, I think being in such kind of a hot area where so many of our execs are looking at every launch, we and have very specific deadlines in which they want those things launched. We've made MVPs very lean, our minimal viable product very lean. And so the must-haves are truly must-haves because we're trying to hit, some really ambitious deadlines. And I think we have so many in our should-haves and could-haves that we would love to go back to. And really a lot of that is driven, the moving the could-haves and should-haves into kind of a V V1.1 or V2 is really driven by either user feedback, right? If we'd done our homework right, we know that some of the should-haves are things that some of our users would really love, and we'll try and get back to it as soon as possible. But things are moving so fast that we certainly what I take a lot of pride in is that the MVP can stand on its own and is still a great product and checks a lot of the boxes for our business needs and metrics. But I think what I would love to do more is to revisit, how do we make it, you've seen blog posts, lovable, how is it minimally lovable? And so get some of the more of the should haves and could haves and then really deep dive into the user feedback so that we can make folks even more engaged in it, make folks even, love it even more, get some of the folks on the fringes that mostly like the product, but there's just kind of this one feature that's the third or fourth thing down on the should haves or could haves. That's some of the challenges that we have on being kind of a resource constrained team, so we can't get to all of those. But I would, as a product manager, would love to, inspire more folks to use and engage our products longer. It's just, there's always another project that's looming that we are trying to get out the door and move on to the next one.
What does a feature release look like for a voice first application? How are you communicating, or are you communicating to your users that, hey, there's something new you can do here?
We try to with the release notes on the various storefronts. I don't know that folks actually read those. I appreciate that some of the improvements in some of the apps show kind of little badges that things have been updated. We have in some of our experiences, we can add audio clips in between to say, hey, this is the new feature, try it out by saying this. And so it is actually a kind of a smaller subset of what we do when we're launching some of these experiences, is to tap into some of those other channels that we already have. So it's like the morning edition experience that we launched. That's within the Play NPR skill, and so that's something where we tack onto the newscast and some of the other places to say, and up first to say that that's available. And so it's some of the similar levers and channels that we use to launch a product.
Some of them. So that morning edition one you mentioned, that was it got kind of swept up in the kind of PR hype, and that's probably what you'd be aiming for most of it. So was that is that a straightforward implicit invocation using the can fulfill intent, or was that something that was more of a kind of because you mentioned that the NPR and Bloomberg and a few others are kind of the preferred news sources for Amazon? Was this kind of one of those arrangements, or was this you just use the can fulfill intent and that's kind of happened from that?
No, that the Play Morning Edition isn't. Is separate. It is the full kind of utterance for it is ask NPR to play Morning Edition. So it's kind of just a shortcut into that one shot utterance, and that goes into our current NPR skill. And so it is, to Dustin's point, it's a feature of our live stream skill. It's just kind of an on-demand version of a really highly sought after show. And so Amazon points Alexa Play Morning Edition to that fuller Ask NPR to Play Morning Edition.
In a lot of ways, you're in a pretty envious position for a lot of people. You're integrated very well with the major platforms, but are there any challenges that come with that?
Oh, yes, there are. I think when I talk about timelines, the reason we're so ambitious and aggressive on our timelines is that what we say is, it's code complete and that the skill is there and it's live. But, it still has to go through a certification process, as folks who are all, listeners of this podcast know, that certification process can be opaque at times. And certainly when it's high profile and there's marketing behind it, Amazon has a special eye and Google has a special eye on it. And so, that those are, plus or minus 3 weeks that we don't know. Is it going to be live in 3 weeks or is it going to be live in 6 weeks? And so, it's hard for me, who's very deadline driven and very absolute. I'm like, this is the day that it launches. That it's hard to explain in the building those kind of nuances of like what phase it is in. Well, it's like, it's complicated, like that it's live but not live, and soft launch, and some of these other kind of vague statuses that are really hard to scale at an organization to explain to non-technical folks. And so that's one of the biggest challenges. But I think for me, who've been in that case more than once here, that it's worth it in the end, right? That they are committed. They are as committed. They're customer obsessed. Google wants it right the first time as well. And so that it's worth it to have that little bit of ambiguity, because they're going to put their might behind it too. And so yes, it is envious. It's first world problems for me to say, oh, Google, we're waiting on Google. But I think, we know that brings a whole different level of scale for us, that we now build that in. And, not 3 years later, we now know that dates are, plus or minus a couple of weeks. And we need to build that into our schedule as well, which is, to Kane's point, that's how we get to some of our should-haves. And we were super disciplined to get our must-haves in. It's a really small and tight feature set, but we now know that sometimes we can get to that should-have list because we're waiting on Google and Amazon to get it through their processes.
Do you have any features or things that you have in any of the skills that, tagging on the back of Dustin's point in terms of being in a relatively privileged position, do you have any features in the experiences that you have that aren't yet available? So an example of that would be the BBC have like a video flash briefing, which it's not open to everyone. There's a set number of news providers that can have a video flash briefing. Is there anything that kind of NPR either has or is using in its current live skills? I'm not asking you to kind of like tell us any secrets of what's coming up, but anything you've got out there right now that you've been kind of privileged enough to be able to use before it's rolled out to the wider market?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously what I'm most proud of is that Alexa, what's the news status? And certainly against the publishers that are up there, I think we needed to do work on our end to make sure that we fulfilled what Alexa needed there. But that's probably the biggest one, where it was, and it was so exciting for us. And we would talk about it all the time. Like, I don't know that this is like, is this an NDA? But once it went live, I think everyone knew that it made sense, and we were there. We're so excited, and that's a prime example of us being like all 3 years of working with them, kind of getting to this point where their strategy with longer form news and our ability to deliver in a way that they were happy with in terms of technology integration was just kind of like the perfect storm for us, and we're so excited and privileged to be at that position. I will say for both platforms, this is no secret, and kind of the opposite side of that is the audio player, right? Like the NPR like really is heavily audio focused, and then that we rely on that audio player to power a lot of our experiences. And we know that there's not a lot of developers or folks, there's not the masses of folks that want to innovate on that player. And there's a lot of unfinished kind of work on that player. And we see it's hard for us to integrate on both platforms. And it's apparently just hard for both platforms to make it so accessible to third-party developers, and that's a challenge for us. And I think that's the part where we want to use our might a little more to really extend that audio player, so it's not just kind of a blind handoff to this other piece of technology that we don't have a ton of control over on both platforms. And so I would love to really push both platforms on making a better, more extensible audio player.
Yeah, I saw a talk from one of your colleagues at Voice Summit, and it sounds like you have to do just a ton of hacks to make this work.
Yeah. I think for them, like the music players don't need a lot of the custom interaction. Really, that's just like that's their kind of developer pitch, is just hand all of the music the audio stuff to us, and we'll deal with it. And for us, we want both sides of it. We want it to be easy to integrate with, but we also want control over the audio player. And so I think that's just something that not a lot of folks and developers ask for. And so we're just one of a very handful who have the chops and the audience to influence that. I think we would love more influence and pressure for them to make it so that it's that we have a little more visibility into statuses and those kind of things, so that we can build out the experience a lot more than we have.
What kind of control do you mean, or what kind of access do you mean? So at the moment, I'm assuming you either send a live feed or you whip over an MP3, and once it's gone, throw it over the wall kind of thing. But what additional capability would be valuable? Because I'm assuming it wouldn't just be valuable for you; it would be valuable for anyone that has any kind of audio content. So what things in particular are you talking about there?
Yeah. Did the audio fail? Did it play all the way through? Can we, how long have they been listening to it? Right. Like a lot of those things, there's like the best example, and this is again quoting the talk that Dustin went to. The status is called nearly finished, and actually that status, we've learned that status happens as soon as the audio starts, and so, or I think as nearly finished downloading, not nearly finished playing. And so there's just a couple of these cases where someone like us who is in this code every day and really, is using it to drive some forward thinking experiences in audio that we complain about, and we tell them like this isn't great, that it won't be addressed until there are more folks that do it, and so. Same on the Google side. Again, it's like you said, Kane, you hand this thing over to the player and you hope that it works. I think that's as developers who are 100% focused on this platform and technology, like that's certainly not a case that gives them a ton of confidence in that the UX is going to be rock solid.
So there you go, boys and girls. If you are on, what is it? Is it uservoice.alexa? Is that what it's called? Uservoice.alexa, something like that. Let me just grab the URL. Hang on. Alexa.uservoice.com. There you go. So if anyone is around there, go to alexa.uservoice.com, and maybe we can create something which will vote up audio player capability. I'm sure there's probably something in there that's wanting more capability around that, but let's maybe try and do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one more question for you. NPR podcast that you recommend, new or just maybe under the radar?
Oh, this is the hardest one because it's hard to say on voice, but It's Been a Minute podcast with Sam Sanders. He does a lot with newsmakers and entertainment in the news, pop culture. He covers the whole gamut. It's really accessible and great podcast. Same with Code Switch. That one is here, based out of NPR here, with a ton of fabulous producers and journalists who are talking and writing about super important race and culture discussions. So It's Been a Minute and Code Switch are my two.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for speaking with us. Where can people find you? Where can people find your team online?
Oh, great. NPR.design is where you'll see a lot of the design setups and then super open and transparent kind of blog posts of how we do our work. NPR.codes is where you'll see a couple of our blog posts from our developers who are also super open about kind of our process there. We don't have a product one, but you can find me on Twitter. It's Ha-Hoa is _. And I link to a lot of those posts as they go out, and certainly as we're out in the world speaking at conferences about this. Please join us at any conference that we're going to be speaking at, because we love to hear from you as developers and NPR fans. Everywhere our developer travels to speak outside of the U.S. as well, and so certainly connect with them as well when they're traveling at those conferences.
There you go. Thank you again so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Kane.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. That was Ha-Hoa Hamano of NPR. interesting discussion now. I really enjoyed that. I love getting into detail about user research and figuring out, how NPR are approaching it and at what point in which projects do they kind of do it and how do they go about recruiting. Loving the fact that they actually recruit for users to come and help them test features within their voice experiences. So there's a little tip for you. That'll be a good one to do. And yeah, it's really refreshing to hear that the team prioritise it so much, that they've got senior management buy-in, and that it's part of their definition of done is, has it gone past somebody from outside this office? Love that. Absolutely love it. Thank you, Ha-Hoa, for joining us. It was an absolutely interesting discussion. Loved also talking about the relationship between NPR and Amazon as well, because being a partner with Amazon and working so closely with Amazon, it's interesting to know how that relationship works and whether you do get access to new features and all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Ha-Hoa, for joining us. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.